A brown paper bag, a fast food tray, a greasy cheeseburger wrapper concealing a microdot containing military satellite specs. In the middle of Kansas. Welcome to the Cold War front you never learned about, served with fries and a Coke. Most people think Cold War espionage happened in smoke-filled rooms, coded messages, and Berlin safe houses. But for decades, Soviet spies were operating in the most American of locations: Burger Kings, McDonald's, and Dairy Queens. From coast to coast, greasy counters and ketchup-stained trays became drop points, message relays, and even recruitment spots. But how? And more importantly, why fast food? This is the story of how the Soviets turned the heart of American culture into a battlefield. The first time Special Agent Roland Keane noticed the pattern, it was buried in a routine surveillance report, stacked under 4 inches of interagency noise, memos, internal alerts, and dead-end leads. But there was something about the repetition that itched at the back of his mind. The subject, one Grigory Ivanovich Belov, known to the CIA and FBI as a mid-ranking Soviet cultural attaché at the USSR Embassy in Washington, officially. Unofficially, he was a suspected KGB field officer with a murky past tied to multiple dead drops and failed FBI tailing efforts stretching back to '79. In February 1983, Keane saw the first of what would become many entries in a growing file: Belov eating alone at a Burger King in Bethesda. Then, a week later, a McDonald's in Falls Church, a Wendy's in Alexandria. Always the same formula. Belov would enter with a precise, almost mechanical regularity around 1 p.m., order a standard American meal, typically a cheeseburger, fries, and coffee, and seat himself near the rear of the dining area. He'd eat slowly, head bowed, eyes flicking to his watch occasionally. Roughly 20 minutes into the meal, a second individual would enter, never the same person, never seated nearby, and conduct an identical routine. No interaction between them. No glances, no words. The second person always exited first, sometimes leaving a tray of trash, sometimes taking it with them. Belov would follow moments later, always making a point to linger by the tray area. On at least 3 occasions, Keane noted, he picked up a forgotten tray left by the first visitor, walked it to the trash bin, but then left without actually disposing of it, instead slipping it into a separate bag. The implications hit like a freight train. Dead drops were common tradecraft, but using fast food locations, a wholly American space of transience, anonymity, and sensory overload, was a masterstroke of cover. Keane alerted his section chief, who authorized a temporary detail to conduct deeper surveillance. Over the next 3 weeks, the FBI mapped out 14 fast food establishments across the metro area visited by Belov since late '82, each showing a similar pattern. No clear links between the drop sites or the unknown second individuals, but always the same ritual, the same exactness, as though orchestrated. The more Keane dug, the more it seemed like Belov wasn't just conducting passive observation or chance meetings. He was running a network, and fast food joints were the chosen theaters. Whether for information drops, payment exchanges, or recruitment signals, the message was clear. This wasn't just espionage. It was operational innovation, and no one had noticed until now. The only certainty was this: something dangerous was unfolding beneath the fluorescent lights of American burger chains, and Keane had just stepped into the deep end of a game played with napkin codes and tray returns. The genius of using American fast food chains for espionage wasn't just in their ubiquity. It was in their architecture of invisibility, a system so flawlessly ordinary that it became an operational dreamscape for Soviet intelligence. These places were built on repetition, both in physical layout and human behavior. The counter always up front, trash bins by the door, booths lining the back walls, soda fountains against the side, with napkin dispensers mounted at measured intervals. It didn't matter whether you were in a McDonald's in suburban Virginia or a Burger King in downtown DC. The blueprint was the same, and for Soviet handlers trained to operate in hostile territory, predictability was sanctuary. Surveillance teams, even when tailing suspects, had a harder time setting up in such environments without standing out. Fast food chains were also transit hubs in disguise. Blue-collar workers, government clerks, school kids, parents, military personnel, all filed in and out, in a ceaseless blur of movement that made it impossible to determine who belonged and who didn't. Everyone came, everyone left, no one stayed long, and that transience gave KGB field operatives and their American assets the kind of operational leeway they couldn't find in embassies or alleyways. A tray left behind wasn't a signal, it was normal. A napkin dispenser with a strip of tape beneath it? Easily missed. A man returning to his seat for a forgotten bag? Routine. These spaces bred the kind of routine movements that made espionage techniques like brush passes, dead drops, and signal markers easy to execute without drawing attention. Even the food helped. Grease-stained bags obscured microfilm canisters, ketchup packets could conceal tiny magnetic strips, and soda cups became dead zones of communication, where tiny notes could be hidden beneath the lids, floating in the ice. In one internal FBI training document, later declassified, the Bureau referred to these restaurants as the soft belly of American surveillance, a stinging admission that the very culture Americans trusted as safe and casual had become a stage for foreign subversion. The Soviet advantage was also cultural. The casual, almost dismissive American attitude toward fast food gave it a blind spot in national security. No one expected espionage in a Dairy Queen. No one suspected that the kid wiping tables might be memorizing faces. No one questioned a man eating alone. He was just on lunch break. That plausible deniability was the final and most critical layer of protection. If something went wrong, if a drop was discovered, or a meeting observed, there was always a fallback explanation. A misplaced bag, a forgotten order, a mistimed lunch. Plausible, defensible, innocent. The entire American fast food ecosystem, with its rigid consistency and built-in chaos, was a masterpiece of accidental cover. The Soviets didn't have to invent it. They just had to recognize its potential and exploit it before the Americans realized they were being outmaneuvered on their own ground. And by the time the FBI caught on, the operation was already deep, its tendrils wrapped around a dozen cities, hidden behind plastic trays and fluorescent lights. In the spring of 1981, buried deep in a strip mall off Ogden Avenue in suburban Chicago, a Wendy's location became ground zero for one of the strangest and most audacious intelligence operations the Midwest had ever unknowingly hosted, anchored by a Soviet asset known only as Elk Grove. The codename, later matched in redacted KGB transmissions and confirmed through declassified CIA intercepts, referred to a mid-level American engineer named Leonard P. Hoff, quiet, unassuming, single, and employed at a communications subcontractor working under the Department of Defense. Hoff had no known Soviet sympathies, no public political affiliations, and no red flags in his background checks. What he did have was access to prototype encryption technology, naval radio schematics, and system specs for communications nodes aboard U.S. military satellites. More importantly, he had a routine. Every Thursday at precisely 11:40 a.m., he would drive to the same Wendy's in Downers Grove, order a baked potato and chili, and sit at the corner booth adjacent to the condiment stand. There, beneath the plastic trays of ketchup and mustard packets, microfilm canisters no wider than a ballpoint pen cap were slipped into the hollow recess of the napkin dispenser, already prepared by his handler the night before, who had visited during the dinner rush and acted like just another customer. Hoff would retrieve the microfilm while pretending to grab extra napkins, never too many, just enough not to raise suspicion. And later, once finished eating, he would deposit his own intel into a specifically marked red squeeze bottle with a deliberately misaligned cap. Inside was a false bottom compartment that could hold folded film, encoded notes, or even payment receipts. The signals for pickup and drop-off were subtle. If the dispenser on the left side of the tray had a single napkin poking out, the drop had occurred. If the right tray was perfectly flush, the handler knew it was time to retrieve. It was low-tech, brilliantly mundane, and nearly invisible to the casual observer. Surveillance teams from the FBI's Chicago field office wouldn't become aware of the pattern until late 1984. By then, the operation had been running flawlessly for nearly 4 years. Memos released decades later under FOIA would detail that the site had been designated as a Level 1 soft drop zone, with as many as 5 Soviet-linked couriers rotating through monthly, using lunch breaks as cover to exchange mission directives, updated ciphers, and operational feedback. One such microfilm reel, recovered after the eventual bust, revealed schematics for a U.S. satellite uplink system, with annotations in Cyrillic handwriting. What made Operation Elk Grove so terrifying wasn't the volume of information, it was the audacity of its location. While parents fed their kids chicken nuggets, and high schoolers flirted by the soda fountain, state secrets were being traded in broad daylight. It was espionage in its most insidious form, not in the shadows, but right there in line behind you, waiting for a Frosty. The Soviets hadn't just weaponized American culture, they'd normalized betrayal, hiding it in the most American of rituals: fast, cheap lunch. Carl Benson's khaki uniform was pressed so sharp it could slice paper, his name tag polished to a mirror shine, and his smile disarming in its all-American sincerity. But behind the fryers and the crown-shaped kids' meals, Benson wasn't just managing a Burger King in Norfolk, Virginia. He was cultivating assets for the Soviet Union, one shift at a time. In 1982, the KGB executed a recruitment initiative, known internally as Project Saltlight, aimed at embedding low-level operatives inside America's civilian infrastructure, not to gather intelligence directly, but to filter, to observe, and most insidiously, to select. Benson, codenamed Castor, was a quiet success story of the program. Placed through a Soviet-controlled shell employment agency in Toronto, and smuggled into a life of corporate banality with a forged resume, impeccable English, and enough knowledge of American fast food systems to avoid detection. His Burger King sat just 5 miles from Naval Station Norfolk, the largest naval base in the world, where young enlistees and their families filled the local economy, and Benson's crew, with teenage sons and daughters looking for part-time jobs and fast cash. For the KGB, it was a goldmine of future potential. Kids with security clearance, adjacent parents, living in homes full of casually dropped phrases about deployments, equipment, operations. Benson's job was not to interrogate. He didn't need to. He merely evaluated. During interviews, he took mental notes on last names, school schedules, and nervous jokes about dad's top-secret stuff. During shifts, he listened. Some kids blabbed without realizing, "Yeah, my mom's working nights again at the airfield," or "My dad's finally back from Diego Garcia." Others revealed more serious vulnerabilities: financial strain, resentment toward the military lifestyle, isolation. Those with a specific combination of proximity, instability, and naivety were marked in Benson's logbook, not with suspicious language, but with innocuous labels like fast learner, good under pressure, or worth mentoring. Over time, some were promoted to shift leaders, then invited to after-hours management seminars held off-site, where subtle ideological conditioning was introduced. Anti-establishment discussions disguised as corporate critique, talk of global injustice wrapped in labor rights rhetoric. For one recruit, Darren Cole, 17 years old, father stationed with Naval Intelligence, the process culminated in a scholarship opportunity through a fictional nonprofit. He never questioned the background checks, the aptitude tests, the long conversations in dim rooms. Years later, Cole would be arrested in connection with an espionage ring that operated out of a Maryland communications contractor. His point of origin? Carl Benson's Burger King. The FBI would later uncover Benson's coded reports embedded in food inventory, orders. 4x bacon is strong family contact, 2x pickles equals low loyalty, 1x cheese equals target viable. Benson vanished in late 1984, slipping out just weeks before a scheduled ICE background audit. The man who had flipped patties and swept floors was a ghost by then, his legacy etched not in espionage thrillers, but in dozens of files labeled at-risk youth, quietly activated or quietly lost. He didn't need to steal secrets. He planted them, like seeds, inside kids with name tags and hairnets, and trusted the next war wouldn't be fought with guns, but with the soft power of the disillusioned. In a 1986 CIA internal security audit labeled classified, eyes only, and buried for decades under layers of bureaucratic dust, analysts uncovered what may be the Cold War's most surreal theater of espionage. American McDonald's birthday parties co-opted as covert distraction mechanisms for Soviet intelligence operations. The audit began innocuously, triggered by an Air Force sergeant's offhand report that a base-adjacent McDonald's in Fayetteville, North Carolina, had an unusually high number of foreign national employees and an odd pattern of clientele, specifically solitary men with no children frequenting the restaurant during peak party hours. The report was initially dismissed as paranoia, but a quiet cross-check with other military installations revealed a disturbing echo. Fort Hood, Norfolk, and Camp Pendleton all had McDonald's franchises within a 2-mile radius that had logged similar anomalies, overlapping time-stamped purchases made with counterfeit or untraceable cards, unattended briefcases left for exactly 3 minutes before being retrieved by different patrons, and employees who disappeared from employment records after a few months with no forwarding information. But the strangest and most effective element of the Soviet tactic was the exploitation of the restaurant's iconic chaos: children's birthday parties. At first glance, it was innocent Americana: cake, balloons, children shrieking as a man in a Ronald McDonald costume twisted balloon animals and posed for pictures. But under the fluorescent lights and the noise of happy birthday choruses, surveillance footage, later obtained by the CIA, showed unmistakable signs of pattern behavior. The mascot, always played by someone on a rotating schedule and often hired through third-party vendors with minimal background checks, would position himself near the play place exit between 2:30 and 3 p.m., standing with an oversized duffel bag of props. On 3 separate occasions, agents tracked a man in a leather jacket, brushing past Ronald, sliding what appeared to be a tiny foil envelope into the duffel bag's outer mesh pocket, never breaking stride, never looking back. Moments later, Ronald would excuse himself for a smoke break, walk out to the parking lot, and casually deposit the envelope into the back seat of an unattended sedan. License plates traced to a diplomatic vehicle. What made these exchanges so brilliant was the environment. The party chaos masked every motion, every glance, and even if anyone noticed something odd, it could be dismissed as part of the act. The combination of music, movement, and sensory overload rendered the fast food location a blind spot in security monitoring, especially since local base intelligence rarely coordinated with civilian franchise owners. Once the pattern was exposed, Operation Red Clown was launched, an internal counter-surveillance effort that involved embedding agents into birthday bookings, posing as parents and catering staff to track the network. What they found confirmed the audit's worst fears. At least 6 McDonald's franchises had been used for active signal relays, with the clown mascot acting as an unwitting, or possibly complicit, signalman. The implications sent chills through Langley. The Soviets hadn't just infiltrated American institutions, they had co-opted childhood itself as camouflage, turning Ronald McDonald from harmless jester into the perfect distraction for treason, all while the kids screamed for more cake. It was supposed to be just another busy lunch shift at the McDonald's on Slauson Avenue in the suburbs east of Los Angeles, where teenagers flipped burgers under buzzing fluorescence and the scent of fryer oil hung in the air like a second skin. But on August 19, 1985, at precisely 1:12 p.m., an unintentional breach of one of the KGB's most sensitive Southern California operations unfolded in the form of a misplaced brown paper bag and a 19-year-old employee named Martin Reyes. Reyes had only been working at the restaurant for 3 months, typically stationed on lobby duty, wiping tables, emptying bins, and restocking straws with the kind of slow boredom only minimum wage could buy. But on that particular day, short-staffed and overrun with the lunchtime rush, he was instructed to keep the trash areas clear to speed up customer flow. At around 1:10 p.m., as a stream of customers weaved between booths, Reyes noticed a full paper bag resting carefully on top of the trash bin near the east exit, uncrumpled, perfectly folded, and out of place amidst the usual chaos. Thinking it was just another leftover meal, he grabbed it and did what he always did: shoved it down into the trash receptacle, tied off the bag, and hauled it toward the back door, humming along to the top 40 station, playing faintly overhead. He had just set it next to the dumpster when a man, mid-40s, dark coat, sunglasses despite the glaring sun, appeared at the exit door, looked around quickly, then stiffened. He took a single step toward the bin, but stopped short when he saw the trash gone. His head turned slowly. Their eyes met for a second, Martin's brow furrowed in confusion, the man's eyes unreadable, and then, as casually as he had arrived, the man turned on his heel and walked briskly away. Martin thought nothing of it, until, hours later during end-of-shift cleaning, he remembered the weight of the bag. It hadn't felt like food. It had been too flat, too heavy, too stiff. Curiosity piqued, and the trash still uncollected by sanitation, he pulled the Tide bag from the bin, opened it in the back alley, and reached inside the stained McDonald's bag. What he found stopped his breath. Inside were 5 folded blueprints sealed in plastic, each marked with classification stamps he'd never seen in person but recognized from movies. U.S. Naval Facility, Confidential, Shipyard Layout, Long Beach Dry Dock. The schematics showed internal layouts of a submarine maintenance facility, including equipment storage, fuel lines, and what appeared to be sensor locations. Martin, terrified and unsure what to do, rebagged the documents and waited until the end of his shift, then walked them into the nearest police station at 11:48 p.m. Within hours, the FBI took over the investigation, the McDonald's was quietly canvassed by plainclothes agents, and security footage was pulled. Grainy, but enough to confirm that the man who placed the bag on the bin had no known identity, no matches in facial recognition, and had seemingly vanished from federal radar. He never returned. No further drops were recorded. Whoever he was, the simple act of an employee doing his job had shattered his cover and exposed a leak that, had it succeeded, could have jeopardized security protocols for one of the Pacific Fleet's most critical facilities. The event would be buried, labeled the Burger Bag Incident, in internal FBI reports, and classified under Tier 1 containment, with Reyes quietly relocated, his name redacted, and his story left untold, until now. By the time the Cold War was nearing its quiet and unceremonious end, entire volumes of Soviet tradecraft were being unearthed from the dark corners of declassified CIA and FBI archives. And among the strangest and most ingenious discoveries were the embedded signals found in fast food detritus, ketchup packets, burger wrappers, and even the position of trash bin lids, all forming a coded language designed to operate in plain sight. The files, marked as part of a joint debrief between the CIA and Naval Intelligence in '92, revealed a codified system of visual cues embedded within the everyday motions of American fast food culture. Subtle manipulations of customer behavior that served as signals between Soviet handlers and their assets. A single burger wrapper folded precisely into a triangle and left in the middle of a tray meant, yes, the drop is active. If the same wrapper was rolled tightly into a cylinder and tucked into a napkin dispenser, it meant, delay, surveillance suspected. Ketchup packets, often overlooked, became perfect tools for binary signaling. If one was placed vertically atop the salt container, it meant abort mission. 2 ketchup packets placed side by side, but slightly askew on the tray indicated message received, awaiting confirmation. Even the angle of a straw poking from a drink cup had meaning. Slanted right signaled a successful handoff. Slanted left meant the drop site had been compromised. But it didn't stop there. The trash bins, standard across every McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's location, became integral parts of the signaling mechanism. A bin lid left fully open during off-peak hours indicated a pending exchange. One slightly ajar meant the asset had arrived but was holding. A lid that was propped open with a single tray balanced across the edge meant a cancellation. These weren't guesses. Each pattern was documented through years of photographic evidence collected by double agents, wiretapped conversations, and field reports. One informant, a defector from the KGB's Technical Operations Division, disclosed that the coding system was known internally as System M, short for Messengerskaya, or Messenger Style, developed specifically for Western operations where subtlety and civilian camouflage were paramount. What made the system so effective wasn't its complexity, it was its invisibility. American culture had trained people to overlook trash, to ignore how wrappers were discarded or how someone balanced a tray while talking on a payphone. It made surveillance nearly impossible because every item used was supposed to be there. In one operation cited in the files, an entire exchange of microfilm occurred through a sequence involving a spilled soda, a double straw signal, and a trash bin lid propped at precisely 45 degrees. The agent observing the scene missed the handoff completely, later admitting that he thought the subject was just being clumsy. This wasn't just tradecraft, it was psychological manipulation of cultural blindness, weaponizing the American tendency to ignore what's familiar. For years, messages flowed under the noses of customers chewing on burgers and parents wrangling screaming toddlers, encoded not in cipher wheels or radio bursts, but in fast food messes left behind on a tray, and all it took to read them was the right eyes. On the sweltering afternoon of July 28, 1984, in Topeka, Kansas, a city that rarely appeared in headlines, let alone the annals of Cold War espionage, a man in a buttoned trench coat and sweat-slicked dress shirt walked into a modest Dairy Queen on South Topeka Boulevard, ordered a small vanilla cone, and calmly asked the teenage cashier if he could speak with the manager in private. The request seemed strange, but not alarming, until the man stepped into the cramped office, closed the door behind him, and announced in clear, heavily accented English, "I am Soviet Signals Officer Alexei Mikhailovich, and I am here to defect." What followed was one of the most bizarre and deeply embarrassing events in FBI counterintelligence history. Alexei, thin, disheveled, and visibly exhausted, proceeded to spend the next 2 hours in the Dairy Queen's back room, detailing an entire chapter of Soviet intelligence operations that no one in U.S. federal law enforcement had fully uncovered. According to transcripts later compiled from the FBI's initial debrief, Alexei claimed to be a former KGB lieutenant assigned to the GRU SVR Cooperative Signals Division, embedded under diplomatic cover at the Soviet consulate in Chicago. But his real work, he said, had nothing to do with diplomacy. It was about maintaining one of the KGB's strangest and most effective networks in the American Midwest. A lattice of more than 30 fast food restaurants, including Dairy Queens, Hardee's, Arby's, and regional burger chains like Winstead's, each used as active drop sites or surveillance posts. He provided names, handlers and couriers alike, along with dates, site addresses, and detailed explanations of drop protocol. He described how encrypted radio signals would be broadcast in brief bursts from vehicles parked outside Dairy Queens every Wednesday between 3:00 and 3:05 p.m., triggering prearranged micro-exchanges between assets using the same System M signals: ketchup positions, napkin folds, and trash bin orientation. He told the manager that Topeka was one of 5 Tier 2 signal relay zones, and that he was the primary transmission technician for the Kansas-Nebraska corridor. Why defect there? Because, as he explained, no one would think to look for a spy in a Dairy Queen. He had grown disillusioned, he said, by the Soviet use of innocent American civilians as cover, particularly low-wage workers who unknowingly swept up coated wrappers or refilled napkin dispensers laced with microfilm. The FBI, when finally alerted by the frantic manager who called from a payphone after the surreal encounter, descended on the location in under an hour and whisked Alexei away to a safe house in Wichita. Analysts initially dismissed parts of his confession as paranoid or exaggerated, until field teams confirmed within days that 3 of the locations he'd named were indeed compromised, one in Omaha, one in Wichita, and one in Salina, all places where microcameras had been discreetly mounted behind drink machines, and where motion-triggered dead drops were still being actively used. Alexei's defection forced a total reevaluation of fast food surveillance across the nation and sparked the formation of a task force codenamed Operation Conefall, named after the location of his unlikely confession, making Alexei Mikhailovich the only known Cold War defector to blow open a spy ring while holding a dripping vanilla ice cream cone in a Kansas Dairy Queen. By the spring of 1985, following a series of humiliating revelations, including the Dairy Queen defection, the burger bag incident, and a growing list of anomalies tied to burger joints across the Midwest, the FBI launched a nationwide sting operation under the codename Operation Fry Trap, a covert counterintelligence campaign that would stretch across 11 states, involve more than 150 agents, and become both a tactical success and a public relations nightmare. The plan was simple in theory, but wildly complex in execution. Embed undercover Bureau agents inside fast food chains flagged by pattern analysis from the Bureau's Behavioral Surveillance Unit, places with suspicious foot traffic, overlapping vehicle registrations, or signs of previously intercepted Soviet drop signals. Agents were trained to pose as fry cooks, shift managers, cashiers, and janitors. Tiny pinhole cameras were embedded inside soda machines, napkin dispensers, and even inside the hollow plastic eyes of restaurant mascots, silent, staring sentinels watching for covert handoffs. Bait drops were introduced to lure out active operatives. seemingly discarded fast food bags stuffed with fake intel, and miniature tracking beacons, left strategically atop trash bins during known Soviet exchange windows. The Bureau also deployed mobile surveillance vans disguised as delivery trucks, and developed internal code phrases among agents working shifts, such as double cheese shift inbound, to denote a suspected drop. The first major bust came in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at a Hardee's just off the interstate where a Soviet asset was caught on tape swapping a disguised thumb drive into a napkin stack, information that later led to the arrest of 2 naval contractors leaking submarine schematics. Weeks later in Dayton, Ohio, a Burger King shift supervisor, real name Leonid Durov, traveling under a false identity, was apprehended after retrieving what he thought was a film canister filled with missile telemetry data. Instead, it was a sealed note that read, "Smile, comrade, you're on camera." But as Frytrap gained momentum and yielded actionable intel, it also produced unintended consequences. Foreign embassies quickly began issuing formal complaints about what they called aggressive entrapment of innocent citizens. And one high-profile incident in Minneapolis spiraled into a diplomatic mess when a Soviet trade attaché was tackled by an FBI agent in a Dairy Queen parking lot after reaching for what turned out to be an actual milkshake he'd ordered, not a microfilm dead drop. The resulting headlines, "Spy Games at the Drive-Thru" and "G-Men Grill Foreign Diplomat in Fry Suit," sparked debate in Congress about overreach, prompting closed-door sessions between intelligence committees and the Justice Department. Still, Frytrap continued through late 1986, amassing dozens of hours of surveillance footage, disrupting 5 confirmed espionage pipelines, and resulting in 14 arrests, 7 of which led to convictions and 3 to asset flips. The final report, classified until 2003, concluded that fast food locations had become soft front lines in hard intelligence battles, and that the Bureau had been unprepared for an enemy that knew how to weaponize fries, Formica counters, and birthday party chaos. While Operation Frytrap didn't dismantle the entire Soviet fast food network, it forced an end to its most visible operations, closing a strange chapter in the Cold War, where American counterintelligence finally fought back, not with guns or spies in trench coats, but with hidden cameras, polyester uniforms, and a very suspicious ketchup packet. He thought he was the invisible hand of justice, an elite courier deep within the Central Intelligence Agency's Domestic Operations Unit, ferrying top-secret microfilm and encoded briefings to secure locations across the East Coast, always discreet, always anonymous. But what James Callan didn't know in 1985 was that every time he pulled into the Burger King drive-thru on Route 206 in Trenton, New Jersey, he wasn't serving U.S. counterintelligence at all. He was feeding Moscow. It began with an assignment cloaked in ultra-compartmentalized secrecy. Callan had been recruited to deliver sensitive payloads, film reels, encrypted cassette tapes, thumb drives disguised as novelty toys, to prearrange drop points without knowing their purpose or destination. The instructions came via dead drops themselves, embedded in crossword puzzle pages, disguised inside books from D.C. coffee houses, or left in marked payphones near the Capitol. He believed these drop-offs were part of a new, compartmentalized domestic relay test inside the CIA, a need-to-know sting against foreign spies, a layer of deep cover so thorough that not even Langley would acknowledge it directly. His most frequent drop site? A particular Burger King with a broken speaker system in its second lane, where he'd order a plain Whopper, hand over an innocuous brown bag at the first window, and drive away without receiving a meal. The man at the window, always the same, round-faced, pale, never speaking, would nod once, take the bag, and shut the window without comment. This ritual occurred bi-weekly, for almost 10 months. But the truth, revealed after the 1987 defection of a Soviet handler named Oleg Reznikov, was devastating. Callan's handler, a CIA liaison officer known internally as Martin Lake, had been flipped by the KGB as early as 1983, operating as a double agent for nearly 4 years before vanishing during an internal audit. Every payload Callan delivered had been redirected via a network of Soviet dead drops and cutouts straight into KGB archives. The Burger King employee, not a government asset, but a Soviet deep cover courier operating under forged documents as Bryce Callahan, a supposedly mute ex-con hired through a third-party shard program. The broken speaker in Lane 2 had never been broken. It had been rewired as an audio signal device, playing a specific frequency each time a drop was scheduled. Callan, when confronted in a sealed debriefing room, initially denied everything, believing he'd been executing patriotic duties. Only when shown footage of his drop, followed hours later by a black Volga sedan pulling into the parking lot and retrieving the bag from the manager's office, did he begin to understand. His guilt was not betrayal, but blind obedience, and that truth shattered him. No charges were filed. He had been used. But his career ended overnight. The damage was staggering. 14 transmission packets leaked, 3 covert networks compromised, and 1 Allied asset in East Berlin executed after identification through intel passed in a Burger King paper bag. The agency sealed the incident under the label, "Drive-through breach, priority red," and internal reviews placed strategic fast food misuse on the threat matrix for the first time. Callan, now a ghost within the intelligence community, became the cautionary tale whispered in training rooms, the man who delivered espionage through a takeout window, thinking he was saving the Republic one Whopper at a time. It was an unassuming Tuesday in the rural town of Sedalia, Missouri, and the Dairy Queen off Highway 50 had just opened its doors for the late morning shift when 18-year-old Trevor Alston, a part-time fry cook and high school senior, stumbled onto what would become one of the strangest and most consequential intelligence leaks of the Cold War's final stretch. Trevor had worked at the Dairy Queen for just under a year, quiet, punctual, and mostly invisible to the older crew, but he had noticed something peculiar about one regular customer, an older man with a silver beard, pressed flannel shirts, and a fixed routine of arriving precisely at 3:15 p.m. every Thursday, ordering a dipped cone and fries, then sitting in the corner booth without fail. He never spoke to anyone, never stayed long, and always left behind a stack of napkins, charred at the edges, as though they'd been held too close to a flame. On August 8, 1989, curiosity overpowered caution when Trevor, cleaning the booth after the man had left, noticed the faint smell of smoke and something stranger. The napkins weren't ordinary. They were heavy, treated with a waxy chemical finish that repelled grease and ash. 3 had been only partially burned, singed around the edges but still legible. Rather than toss them as he usually did, Trevor shoved them into his apron, thinking they might be something odd. When he got home, under the dull glare of his desk lamp, he unfolded the napkins carefully, revealing what no civilian should ever have seen: military-grade schematics of a submarine refueling sequence, hand-drawn annotations, positional charts of the U.S. Columbia's projected dry dock rotation, and acronyms Trevor didn't understand, but would later match U.S. Navy communication designations. Rattled, he turned them over to his civics teacher, a Vietnam veteran who promptly contacted the local police, who then escalated it to the regional FBI field office. Within 48 hours, federal agents had descended on Sedalia in unmarked vehicles, quietly questioning staff, reviewing trash logs, and sealing off the restaurant's CCTV system. The napkins were confirmed to have been printed on a specialized cellulose blend paper, often used in covert message destruction, chemically treated to combust cleanly under low heat, leaving little to no ash, standard KGB protocol for temporary field notes. The documents themselves contained enough operational data to confirm upcoming naval deployments and submarine servicing schedules, details that should never have left a secure facility, let alone ended up under a ketchup stain in rural Missouri. The incident sparked an internal review within the Navy and led to a closed-session congressional inquiry about the Department of Defense's vulnerability to low-tech leaks, particularly from civilian intersections like fast food venues. No one ever identified the silver-bearded man. Surveillance footage showed he walked the same sick-low box to and from the Dairy Queen every week, disappearing into the anonymity of small-town life. What he left behind, perhaps burned too hastily or with deliberate intent, nearly exposed a classified naval operation and turned a teenage fry cook into an accidental whistleblower. The incident was officially labeled DQ-11 in FBI memos, a case still partially redacted and still used in training modules as a reminder that not all espionage is satellites and spies in suits. Sometimes it's a napkin in a booth, just one spark away from history. When the Berlin Wall fell and the Iron Curtain lifted, the world raced to rewrite the narrative of the Cold War, painting it as a saga of nuclear brinkmanship, satellite duels, and smoke-filled embassies where trench-coated spies whispered in dead languages. But buried deep within newly declassified archives, among the memos stamped with faded top-secret labels and forgotten surveillance footage stored on brittle reels, was a quieter, stranger truth. Over 60 confirmed Soviet intelligence drop sites had been hidden in plain sight inside American fast food chains, a truth too absurd for most to believe and too terrifying for counterintelligence agencies to ignore. The final report, codenamed Project Freiline, compiled by a CIA-FBI joint task force in '94 and kept sealed for nearly 2 decades, cataloged a vast network of espionage infrastructure embedded not in embassies or dark alleys, but in the fluorescent-lit heart of American suburbia. Burger joints, ice cream counters, chicken shacks, and pizza parlors. From 1978 through 1990, Soviet handlers and their American assets used everyday restaurant behaviors, trash patterns, condiment arrangements, seating choices, as covert communication tools. Surveillance confirmed that napkin dispensers, straw holders, and even Happy Meal toys had been weaponized for information transfer. In Des Moines, an Arby's fryer timer was rewired to emit a specific coded pulse when a drop was ready. In Tacoma, a Pizza Hut booth was marked with invisible ink visible only under ultraviolet light installed in a keychain flashlight. The Soviets hadn't just adapted to American culture, they'd become students of it, embedding their operations in the casual chaos of lunchtime routines, where no one looked twice at a lingering stranger or a customer who came in but never ordered. Perhaps the most damning insight wasn't the sophistication of these methods, but how long they went unnoticed. Even now, decades later, most Americans recall the Cold War through the lens of foreign capitals and tense summits, never suspecting that part of it had been fought between milkshakes and mop buckets. Fast food franchises became unintentional battlegrounds, their standardization and anonymity offering an irresistible toolkit for spies. Predictable layouts, constant turnover, little scrutiny. The fast food ecosystem was so ingrained in American life that it became invisible, and that invisibility was exploited with ruthless efficiency. While many of the Soviet operatives involved have vanished into the fog of history, and most of the documents remain partially redacted, the legacy of this strange chapter lingers. Training materials at Langley now include case studies on low-visibility espionage in high-visibility locations. A plaque, deliberately nondescript, was quietly installed at FBI headquarters, listing code names like Elk Grove, Fry Trap, and Conefall. And somewhere, likely without knowing it, you've stood at a table or sat in a booth where secrets changed hands, where intelligence was passed in a burger wrapper or encoded in a ketchup packet's position. It wasn't cinematic, it wasn't loud, but it worked. The Cold War wasn't just fought in war rooms and nuclear silos, it was fought during lunch hour, under flickering neon signs, in the places no one ever thought to look. That was the hidden legacy. Espionage so ordinary, it was almost genius. If you thought spies only met in dark alleys and foreign embassies, think again. The next time you grab a burger or wait in line for fries, remember, history was made in places just like that. Want more hidden Cold War stories like this one? Subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss the secrets hiding in plain sight.